Greetings and welcome. I am Jack and this is the second part of the beginner's guide for Pathfinder's 2nd edition Druid. In our last video we covered the Druid class, we fell in love with the wild shape feature and decided to build a character around it. So we took all the feats and archetypes that we could to try and maximize our effectiveness while under wild shape. We did not build exactly a true Gish because we cannot truly use spells and melee at the same time because wild shape prevents us from casting spells. However, we have a character who has access to two different combat modes, a melee one and a spellcasting one. So what we're going to do in this video is trying to figure out how effective we are at both by taking a look at a damage projection and seeing how our damage increases as we level up, and then taking a look at what our spell selection might look like. I've linked the previous part of this video in the description below, so let's not waste any more time and get right into the damage projection. First of all, the assumptions we are making are that we are facing an enemy of our level with high armor class. We are making 2 strikes against them every round. Now this is a reasonable assumption usually for a martial, but for the druid it's a bit optimistic because our first round of combat we will never be able to do this because we will have to use 2 actions to wild shape. So we are being a bit generous with our estimates. Of course, our damage projection is going to start from level 3 because we have access to no combat form at level 1 and level 2, so we are just interested in evaluating how good wild shape is in combat, and that starts only at level 3. Another assumption is that we are always using our best combat form for that particular level. This means I never use form control, and for the animal form I chose the canine form. For the ferocious form I chose the Triceratops. For the dragon form, any dragon which deals 2d10 plus 1d12 damage. I did add the elemental damage to it, but I did not consider any damage resistance or vulnerabilities. For the monstrous form, I made the calculations with the purple worm, and then at level 20, we made our calculations with the kaiju form. The last assumption I made is that you can always add your heritage and ancestry feats to your wild shape damage. So I did add stuff like telluric power and bloody blows and spirit strikes when they became available. But I did not add the damage from the weapon specialization. Now that is a bit controversial. There are people who argue that you should add it, and others who argue that you shouldn't, and it's not clear. So since I was already adding the heritage and ancestry feats, I didn't want to be too generous, so I did not consider that. But as we will see, adding weapon specialization would not really make the druid overpowered, so that's a good argument you can present your DM in favor of allowing it. So keeping in mind all the assumptions we are making, this is how the damage projection of the character looks like. Now the first thing we notice is that it's a non-monotone growth. This is not exclusive of the druid. This means that we're not constantly increasing our damage as we level up. That would be the case in something like 5th edition. Usually the damage growth of a dedicated melee character is monotone. It's always either increasing or remaining constant. However, for the druid this is not true, and in general this is not true for any martial class in Pathfinder 2nd edition. And this is because at certain levels the armor class of enemies increases more than your damage bonus. So you have dips in your damage potential. I am pointing this out now, however, because for the druid this issue is more severe than for other martial characters, because not only the enemy armor class is increasing, but also if we rely on our battle form attack bonus, that is not increasing as we level up, and so we are compounding this effect by adding a scaling armor class to a non-scaling attack bonus. One way we minimize this, and we can see this at level 10, that's where our attack bonus is high enough that we can use our own attack bonus instead of the battle forms. So there, our damage, instead of decreasing because of the increase of the enemy armor class and the decrease of our own attack bonus, we are able to keep our damage constant at level 10. So with our 2 strikes, we are looking at a damage that starts around 10 damage per rounds and goes up to 45-ish. there is certainly a growth in the amount of damage we're dealing. How significant is this? Well, let us use our usual comparison with the two-handed weapon fighter, and we see something that doesn't really surprise us. The two-handed weapon fighter is a fighter who is dual-wielding picks, and it's a crit build, trying to crit fish, do a lot of strikes, and capitalize on the deadly traits and the pick's critical specialization. They are using double slice, so this would be their double slicing, the damage they would do with their two actions dedicated to double slicing. The damage of the fighter is always superior to ours. In the early game, it's around 50-ish% higher than ours. But then at around level 12, there is this abyss which opens, and they end up at level 20 doing more than 3 times the damage we deal, which is kind of depressing. But there is a but. Level 12, which is where this difference in damage starts to become more and more significant, is also the level where we unlock the dragon form. This would mean that at that level, we could, once every 1d4 rounds, use our AoE breath attack. If we are able to hit multiple creatures with that breath attack and maybe trigger some damage weaknesses, well, then our damage would look completely different, but it's kind of hard to put it down on a graph because there are too many unknown variables. How many enemies are we hitting? Are they resistant, vulnerable? What's going on? We don't know. But if we are just striking, then yes, we are markedly inferior to the fighter. We do have a number of advantages. We can fly. That's not necessarily true of the fighter. We also have way bigger reach thanks to our increased size. So it's not all doom and gloom, and we are comparing ourselves against the golden standard, the optimal damage dealing build. What happens if we look at another martial class? So here I put our bad champion. So the champion we built a couple of videos ago, and that build was not really about dealing damage. They sacrificed damage dealing for control capabilities, and what I'm showing now is 2 strikes with their weapon. And we see that if we compare ourselves with this martial class, once again, we are generally slightly inferior to them in terms of damage, except at level 9, where we, for a brief time, are better than them. But again, past level 12, all martials are going to become better than us because they get better proficiency with their martial weapons. And they also get their weapon specialization, so we are going to fall behind all these martial, no matter how bad they are. Just the fact that they have better proficiencies than us and we can't do anything about it, we are falling behind. Another reason why we're falling behind is that these martial characters started with an 18 in strength, and eventually they're going to get a 22, while we can never reach such high strength. Even if we wanted to, we couldn't start with an 18 in strength because our class doesn't allow us to. Which is why at higher level, Wild Shape falls behind in terms of damage. This tells us a very interesting and important thing, that as we get higher and higher in level, we should, if we want to be efficient in combat, we should try to remain in our human form and cast spells. After all, this is what our class is all about. This is less true at lower levels. At lower levels, we aren't really put to shame by martial characters. Of course, if we're facing against an optimal damage dealing build, then we cannot compete, but our contribution in combat is not insignificant. So at these low levels, where our spell slots are more rare and more valuable, we can try and preserve them by using our Wild Shape during a whole combat encounter and contribute by becoming a damage dealer. Later on, this issue will be less marked because we will have more spell slots, and so there will be more combats where we can remain spellcasters. So Wild Shape is the thing that you do when you want to save spell slots, and this is an immensely powerful asset for a spellcaster. We have a sustainable effect which recharges at the end of every combat, so it's very spammable, and it allows us to contribute without expending our most valuable resource, which are the spell slots. So the moral of the story is, do not obsess over wild shaping always and at all times. If you're facing a hard encounter, if you're facing a boss, probably wild shaping is a bad idea. You must also keep in mind that your defenses will be lower than any martial character, so you might even put yourself in danger by wild shaping. But if you're facing some low-level trash that is there to drain your resources and make you waste combat potential, then Wild Shaping is a very appealing option for you. The last thing to keep in mind is that Wild Shape can also be used as a control option by capitalizing on athletics action to trip or grapple or carry out other athletics action to control the battlefield. So this is what we learn from our damage projection. The last missing piece to evaluate the character properly is to see how does the primal spellcasting list work, what do we gain from it, and how we can use it in combat for those moments where we are in our human form, well, in our orc form. So let's go and take a look at a spellcasting snapshot. Okay, we start at level 1 with the selection of our cantrips. The first thing we need to be concerned about, in particular at level 1, where we cannot wild shape, is damage. Fortunately, we have access to a very good, many people say the best damage cantrip in the game. It's kind of hard to argue against it, and that is Electric Arc. So our damage needs are covered by that. As I mentioned in the build, a very efficient use of our turns would be casting Electric Arc and then commanding an animal companion with our third action to deal a bit more damage. We also have access to Guidance, which is not as spammable as it is in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. You can only use it once per hour on any given target, but you give them a nice status bonus to something which can be a skill check or an attack roll, so it's good. It's only one action, and it's good for these circumstances where you really want to make sure a skill check goes through or an attack hits. Well, you don't make sure, but you improve your chances. As always, Detect Magic is on this list. Not any spellcaster needs to get it, but at least one does. And these two are really a more flexible slots. You can pick your favorite here. I took another offensive cantrip, which is Scatter Scree. This cantrip also has a bit of a control capability because it creates difficult terrain. So this seems a very interesting effect. It doesn't deal much damage, but maybe you're facing a slow enemy that walks towards you, and you can kind of kite them using this spell, so this might be circumstantially very useful. And finally, I took another damage cantrip. If you're fighting something which is very far away, Ray of Frost is an attack cantrip with a huge range, and seems useful, again, if you need to hit things that are very far away. We also have 2 level 1 spells. One thing that I should have mentioned is that the Druid is a prepared spellcaster, a Vancian prepared spellcaster. So all the things that I said about the Cleric apply for the Druid. We are going, therefore, to make a spell list for general situations where we don't know what we are going up against. And if I don't know what's going to happen during the day, I think that the best thing I can choose here is Heal, and I will choose it twice. You could go for Shali and try to buff your damage, but this is like the poor man's version of magic weapon. I don't think it's as good as healing. Also, unlike clerics, we do not have access to extra casts of heals. These are all the spells we get, so it's really important that we are able to heal the party. Again, this becomes not true if there are other sources of healing in the party. Is there a cleric in the party? Is there a champion who can lay on hand? Or maybe is everyone very tanky or fights from a range, and so the damage we take is kind of reduced? Or, on the other hand, is there maybe a barbarian in the party who's going to take a lot of damage and require a lot of healing? This will shape hugely how these spell selection will go. But not knowing any of these things, I'm betting on the fact that heal might come in handy. If that is not true, because you know the circumstances are different, then you can experiment with something else, like summons or control spells like Fear. This is all for our level 1. Let's level up and go to level 6. So at level 6, first level heals are not going to matter that much. People have more HP. Our first level spells also matter less because we've got higher level spell slots. We can do more impactful things. So I'm going to use our first level spell slots for buffing. Longstrider is a nice long duration buff, which applies also to our wild shape. It might be more efficient to cast it on a martial character other than ourselves, because they are always going to want to rush against the enemy, while this is not necessarily true for us. But if there is no one else who's a good target, then we can certainly benefit from increased movement speed. I mentioned summons, and I think having access to low-level summons can be quite useful. You can choose summon animal or summon Fey. I choose summon Fey because I think they might be able to manipulate objects more easily than animals. So you can use them to trigger traps or maybe scout ahead a bit or do things that you think might be too dangerous for one of the party members to attempt. And the less circumstantial level 1 spell would be Fear. This is a very reliable way of applying the frightened condition to a target. It's something that I definitely see myself casting at least once a day. Moving on to our level 2 spell slots, in general, what I would like my character to have is damage from our spells and healing, because that's two things that the primal spell list can do. So I'm going to dedicate my highest spell levels to damage, and the second next best spell slots are going to be reserved for healing. So I want in general at least 2 spell slots that I can use to heal. I will use in this case second level spell slots to prepare 2 copies of heal. Again, this is very taxing on us, but if there is no one else in the party who can heal, then I would prepare even more healing spells. And even if there are other healers, unless they are dedicated healers, heal looks like the kind of spell you can never have enough of. For a third second level spell, this level is one of the early levels. We are using at level 6 Wild Shape a lot. So this means we are not casting spells a lot. So spells that have longish duration that we can pre-cast and then Wild Shape while keeping active seem pretty useful. Barkskin gives us resistance to physical damage at the price of a weakness to fire damage. And it's something that works nicely with Wild Shape, increases our survivability. Again, this might be more beneficial to a martial character, but if there is no one who can really use it, then this is certainly helpful for our Wild Shapes. Then we get third level spell slots, and I'm going to choose Fireball, and I'm going to choose Fireball for all 3 of these spell slots. The reasoning is, if we are facing a combat encounter where we need our damage, maybe there are a lot of enemies, maybe there is a single powerful enemy, then we can just spam fireballs and forget about our Wild Shapes. And then maybe after we've softened the enemy up with our fireball, we can conclude the encounter by Wild Shaping. If the circumstances do not align, the encounter looks easy and fireball, it looks like it would be wasteful to cast fireball, then we can just preserve our spell slots and Wild Shape into a giant wolf and murder things. So let's increase our levels even further and see what we look like at level 11. As far as first level spells go, I'm going to prepare an extra cast of Fear instead of Longstrider, and this is because I can take Longstrider now as a second level spell. Second level spell slots are less valuable right now, so I can upcast Longstrider and have it last for 8 hours. Another useful spell to have active is Dark Vision for those who do not possess it. Again, long duration, and there might be someone in our party who can use it. If not, an extra Longstrider is fine. So these are buffs we can cast before combat. And if we don't want to Wild Shape, a spell we can cast in combat instead is Lose Time Arrow to grant all our party members an extra action which they can use to move. We no longer need our third level spell slots for fireballs. We're going to use our higher level spell slots for damage, so we can deal more damage. This frees them up for control capabilities, and a very powerful third level spell is Slow. At lower levels, I prioritized Fireball because I felt it would be more impactful to murder everything, but right now, denying enemies of actions seems very potent, so what we do is we use our higher level spell slots for AoE damage, and we use Slow for when we fight single targets like boss encounters levels, which we established are not very good while we are Wild Shaping. So we stay in our humanoid form and we just spam slow spells. We have 4th level spell slots as well. A very powerful spell, which you can cast heightened on a martial, is the Enlarge spell with the dual pick wielding fighter. Casting Enlarge on them would be a great boon because not only it would increase their bonus to melee damage, but it would also increase their reach, allowing them to more easily trigger their opportunity attacks. So we're not really competing with that fighter anymore. We are helping them do what they do best and excel at it, which is the spirit of the game, I guess. 4th level is not yet one of the critical spell levels which we use for damage. However, our higher level spell slots are going to be pretty packed with good, excellent choices. So I am going to prepare a cheeky heightened fireball. It's not the most damage in the world, but it might come in handy sometimes. For our fourth slot, again, we have options. You could just prepare another fireball. There is a powerful self-buff in the spell called Draw the Lightning. This allows you to hit a creature with a bit of lightning damage, and then allows you to add an additional 1d12 electricity damage to your first strike each round. So you can cast this spell, then Wild Shape, and then fight in combat. This is very action intensive, so you will need to, on the first round, cast Draw the Lightning, then do something else with your third action, then Wild Shape and do your first strike while Wild Shaped, and then you can start your combat routine striking twice. Of course, at this point, we just gained access to Flurry of Blows, so already on the second round we can do a flurry and strike twice, which is kind of like the optimal condition for our damage. Another option is the very interestingly named spell Tortoise and the Hare, which is what I'm going to take because the name is very cool, although it's a bit confusing because this is a spell which basically siphons the speed from a creature, and the story is not really about the tortoise stealing the speed from the hare. It is a slow effect, but it's kind of like slow, but more powerful because it also quickens you if the enemy fails the saving throw. So if there is someone who certainly benefits from being quickened is the Druid. It allows you to stride and then use Flurry of Blows. In general, being quickened works very well for a character that has such a packed turn action-wise as ourselves. In the worst scenario, this is just slow as a 4th level spell, and slow is so good that casting it as at 4th level doesn't really feel that bad. For our 5th level spell slots, this is where we need our heals, so again we prepare a couple of those. This might be also something that we can use on ourselves. If we underestimate the difficulty of a combat, we wade in melee and then we get murdered. Dismissing our Wild Shape and self-healing can really save our lives, so we want our heal to be high level so that it can provide a lot of hit points. There is a 5th level spell which is just too good not to take, and it's Wall of Stone. It's a wall spell. Wall spells are very powerful control effects. This is not as broken as the indestructible Wall of Force from 5th edition, but even if it isn't indestructible, it has pretty nice amount of hit points, and enemies are going to have to waste actions trying to break it down. So it's very potent. You can use it to break off creatures from the main engagement. Walls are just good. Any Dungeons and Dragons player will know how good wall spells are. So the 3 action cost and 5th level spell slots are a fair price to pay for such a powerful effect. Lastly, we get to our 6th level spell slots. We want damage, and so we have access to a spell which is even better than Fireball damage-wise, and that spell is Chain Lightning. First of all, I hear that fire damage is very often resisted, so lightning seems more reliable than fire damage. Second, you can target creatures, so this is more party-friendly than Fireball. So even if you've got melee characters mixed up with your targets, Chain Lightning doesn't care. Be careful, because if any target critically succeeds at their saving throw, the chain is going to stop. So always target weak enemies that have weak saving throws first, and then the boss gets hit for the loss. Having this prepared twice is certainly an option you can do. There is a spell which heightens at level 6, and that spell is low, which becomes an AoE control spell. It is very powerful, so I prepared 1 of each. Sometimes you will want 2 slows, sometimes you will want 2 chain lightnings. If you don't know, pick 1 of each, and you are surely going to find a situation where you can cast 1. You can cast it once per day. Okay, let's level up 5 more times and see how our spell selection looks like at level 16. So our first level spells remain the same. We don't need Longstrider anymore because we already have a status bonus to our speed because of Monk moves. We just gained that. So if there aren't any other good targets, any other martial characters who can benefit from this, we might have to swap it out and take something else. For example, another cost of Lose times Arrow. But, maybe there is another character who doesn't have a status bonus to the movement, and we can keep Longstrider if that is the case. Slow is still very powerful and very relevant and something we can happily spam. Enlarge, again, we can, if marshals don't have ways to self-enlarge, we can certainly help them with that, so we'll keep it. At this point, Fireball, I feel, doesn't really deal that much damage, so we can prepare extra slow spells. So this is slow plus, so 2 cast of Tortoise and the Hare. We won't use our 5th level spell slots for heals anymore, so I think we can prepare an extra cast of Wall of Stone. And for the last 5th level spell slot, I prepared another cast of Tortoise and the Hare. Why am I banking up on these slow effects so much? Well, the reason is that at this point, the encounters where we don't want to be wild-shaped are typically the encounters where we are facing single targets, which are very strong and powerful. We are not going to be able to hit these enemies reliably, and these enemies are going to deal a lot of damage to us, so we want to stay behind and cast spells. And the spells that are very good to spam against them are spells that take away their actions. Thanks to Dragon Form, we don't have to worry that much anymore about AoE damage because we can use a breath attack. Although there might be circumstances where we want to deal a lot of AoE damage, and that's where our high-level spell slots come into play. So again, banking on slow effects. And here you could take a 3rd slow effect, for sure, why not? This is also AoE, so you can affect other reinforcements that our powerful boss-level enemies might have around them. So having a 3rd slow spell is for certain not a bad idea. But just, for variety's sake, we pick a longish duration buff, which is Stone Skin. For 20 minutes, this gives 10 physical resistance to a creature. This might be better spent on a martial character who has high armor class, something like a champion, because every time the target is hit, the duration of the spell is decreased by 1 minute. So if we cast it on ourselves and we get hit a lot, this spell is not going to last very long, and we are not going to be able to carry it across multiple combats, as someone like a champion might. Still, we are a decent enough target for this kind of effect. Level 7, as we said, we want to have these spell slots for our healing effects. So again, we're going to bank on healing, and it's starting to feel really expensive, but it's very important, especially for a character such as ourselves, which is not very heavy on defenses, to have access to these effects. If your party can mitigate that, then great, but if not taking heal seems too dangerous. And actually, I feel like I'm not taking nearly enough healing spells with this build. But there is a spell which heightens so well at 7th level that it would be a crime not to take it, and that spell is Haste. Now it targets your entire party, basically, and it quickens the entire party. So this seems like a very potent buff for encounters where you're going to need lots of actions maybe to move around. At level 8, we have lots of control. We have healing. We could take more healing if we wanted to. There are some nice effects at level 8, such as Earthquake or Horrid Wilting, which seems powerful against in certain circumstances, like when you're facing plants. However, the most reliable damage option here, I think, is just heightened Chain Lightning. You deal more damage, and it kind of always works. So I'm going to prepare 2 copies of it. And then the 3rd option is what I feel is more like the flex spot. So what I'm going to take is another instance of Chain Lightning here. And this is because I picked Monstrosity shape at level 16, because I was experimenting with all the possible wild shapes you have available. However, considering how inefficient we saw wild shape is in combat at this high level, I think that if I had to rethink this build, I would not focus as much on the wild shape feats. And in particular, at level 16, I could take Effortless Concentration instead of Monstrosity shape. This would encourage me to take more sustained spells. Right now we have none. And a good sustained spell we can cast at level 8 is a Summon spell. Summon spells can be used in combat if they are cast at the highest possible level. We can cast Summon Animal. We can have some pretty decent partner in combat. In particular, while we are wild-shaped, we can still sustain for free our animal companion, and so we can create tag teams of a dragon and a huge animal companion to deal with easier combat encounters. But since we went for Monstrosity shape instead, to play around a bit with the Phoenix and the Purple Worm, then I just took Chain Lightning, which is the safest bet. Okay, and to wrap this up, we can go and see what our druid looks like at the end of their career at level 20. So all our low-level spells, I think, should remain the same. The reasoning behind their choice has not changed, so I just kept them the same. At level 7, we can bank up on more haste if we want. Giving extra actions to the entire party seems very powerful. This might not be true if many of your party members have capstone abilities, for example, that already make them quickened and give them extra actions. A lot of martial classes have those, so if this is not the case, then you can reconsider these selections and get, for example, more slow effects, which you can never really have enough of. Using 9th and 10th level spell slots for healing feels terrible, so we are going to use our 8th level spell slots for that instead. And we're going to take the usual 2 heal spells, and I'm going to keep a level 8 Chain Lightning for when you want to deal damage, but you don't really want to spend a higher level spell slot for that. For our 9th level spell slots, we can take Meteor Swarm for the fleshy big murder damage. If you feel like you're going to need Disjunction, you can prepare it. Massacre is also potentially very powerful effect, but Meteor Swarm seems like the most reliable source of AoE damage. This is not as party friendly as Chain Lightning, so if you have trouble targeting people with Meteor Swarm, just prepare heightened versions of Chain Lightning, I guess. For our last 9th level spell, we can prepare more Meteor Swarms, we can prepare heightened Chain Lightning, which is what I'm going to pick here, just for when you need to be more surgical with your damage. Again, I think the best option here would be a summon spell, like a summon animal, if paired with the 16th level feat Effortless Concentration. I also think that taking True Shapeshifter at level 20 is a bit of a waste. It allows you to cast Nature Incarnate, basically, but I think that the best option probably for the 10th level spell is Primal Phenomenon, which is basically Wish. So Hierophant Power would allow you to cast Primal Phenomenon twice, whereas True Shapeshifter allows you to cast Nature Incarnate once per day using your Wild Shape. It also enhances Wild Shape, allowing you to morph from Wild Shape to another, so it fit thematically very well with the build, but from the efficiency point of view, I think Hierophant Power is slightly more appealing. So this is what our spell selection looks like at the end of the day. We started up at lower levels with a bit of damage and very light control in the form of fear-like effects and some buffs, and then eventually we ended up with a spell list that is capable of doing AoE damage in quite an excellent way. It has access to heal to support the party, it has some nice buffs in the form of haste, and some very potent control and debuff effects. We have a bunch of slows, and we have some battlefield control in the form of Wall of Stone effects. So I think that this spell list has really nothing to envy from other spellcasters like the Bard, and it certainly looks way better than the Cleric's spell list. And this is, I think, a good point to make a comparison with someone who is usually a competitor of the Druid, which is the Cleric. We are both divine-ish spellcasters, we are both prepared spellcasters, and the Druid is just the fun spellcaster, because we can turn into other creatures, we can turn into dragons, we can turn into giant monsters, and we can more easily preserve our spell slots when compared to a cleric. So are druids just the superior version? Well, I don't know about that. While making this spell list, I had a lot of trouble fitting all the effects that I would have liked in the slots that the druid has available. This is a problem that I didn't feel as much from the cleric. The cleric doesn't have this heal problem. The access that the cleric has to the heal spell on its own is enough to make him a competitor to the druid. While the druid spell selection is better, they aren't allowed to take as many spells as they would want, because they have to spend some of these spells on healing effects. Of course, the best option, and this seems like a recurring theme in Pathfinder 2nd edition, when you find two classes that could compete with each other, the best option would be to have both in a party and instead have them synergize with one another. So if you have a cleric in your party, all of a sudden you can forget about taking heals with the druid. Well, I would still take a couple, even then I would still take a couple, but you free these high-level spell slots for more powerful effects that the cleric doesn't have access to. So, for example, slow. And while the druid has overall less spell slots, because the cleric does get all these high-level spell slots in addition to the ones the druid has, the druid is able to preserve their spell slots better because of their ability to be useful in combat without using spells and without sacrificing much from his class features, without having issues with multiple attribute dependency and having to worry about investing into feats. This build could work if we took away all the free archetypes and we just forgot about strength and used our wild shape battle form. We would still be decent-ish, not as good as this build is. The moral of this build, I think, and the thought I would like to leave you with, is that wild shape is very powerful, not because it makes the druid into a martial character, but because it gives many options to the druid for out-of-combat utility and in combat to preserve their spell slots by turning into a decent, not excellent, but decent striker. And this can be accomplished even with the basic cast of the spell without worrying about your attack bonus. Of course, then you really want to reserve this for the very easy combat encounters. And you still want to invest some of your class feats into keeping your wild shape up to the highest spell levels you can cast. So let's wrap up the video with the final thoughts on the Druid class. It's an amazing class. There's nothing else to say. The problem-solving capability of the class is immense. I am very curious to see what a rogue will look like in Pathfinder 2nd edition, because right now I am very skeptical that the rogue would be a better scout than the druid. You have a lot of freedom and flexibility from the class, seeing how you can really choose what your attributes of choice will be. You can really experiment with your ability scores. Investing into charisma is certainly a very appealing option, so your druid can also not be the face of the party, but be kind of competent in social situations. Your spell option is incredibly flexible, and it allows you to do really all the things that a spellcaster will want to do with their spells. And the classes doesn't have any glaring weaknesses. It has some things that it's not as good as at doing as the specialists of that field, melee damage, for example. But it seems like a great class, especially for a beginner who wants to experience a bit of all the different aspects of a role-playing game and all the different aspects that Pathfinder can offer. It's a class I would definitely recommend to a beginner player. So this concludes the video. It was a shorter one. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I hope it's a good one. These videos always end up being longer than I anticipate. And let me know what you think about the Druid class and this version of the Druid in particular. And I'll see you all in the next one.